In our last video for week 4, we're going to discuss how to do the confidence interval process on your calculator. You should still draw your normal distribution or your student t distribution and mark the width of that confidence level. You should still define your variable and write your answer in a final sentence. But in place of having to do the equation for a confidence interval, you would just enter the commands that you typed in your calculator. So all of the confidence interval commands are under our stat menu. So we're going to go to our stat button, and then we're going to move over to tests. And basically everything we're doing for the rest of this course is statistical inference, and it should be in the test menu. So stat tests, and you'll notice options 1 through 6, test, 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 test. We're going to talk about tests starting next week. But starting at option 7, we start to see intervals. So options 7 and 8, z interval and t interval, are when we're estimating a mean. We use z interval when we know the standard deviation for the population. We use t interval when we don't know the population standard deviation. If we're estimating a proportion, I want to do a z interval for proportions, and we know that that formula looks different than a z interval for means, and so it gets a different command, and it's off the screen. You have to scroll down to option A, which says 1 prop z int, 1 proportion z interval. For proportions, if you are given p prime and n in the problem instead of x and n, you need to calculate x. The calculator is going to ask you for x and n. And remember from a previous video, we know x is n times p prime. And you have to round that to the nearest whole number because your calculator is expecting a whole number for the number of successes. Because I shouldn't have fractions of a person. That's not a good thing. The other note before we do some examples, if you are estimating means, sometimes you're given the sample statistics. Sometimes you are given a list of raw data. And so that command is going to give you an option between raw data or summary stats. If you have raw data, you need to put your data in a list before you call z interval. The data already needs to be in a list before you start doing your confidence interval calculations, because it's going to ask you where is your data, and if you don't have any data, it's not going to work. We're going to go ahead and look at some of our previous examples to see what they look like on a calculator. So let's go ahead and go back to our very first confidence interval video, which was a confidence interval for means where we knew the population standard deviation. So we are going back to our average pizza delivery time example. And in this case, we wanted to construct a 90% confidence interval for the population mean delivery time. We can see that we were given the population standard deviation and we're estimating a mean, so we know that's a z interval. So I'm going to go up to option 7 and press enter. And I want to go over to stats because they gave me my summary statistics. So my population standard deviation in this example was 6. My sample mean was 36. My sample size was 28, and my confidence level was 0.9. So it asks for those 4 things we had summarized here, and it spits out approximately what we got by hand, 34.1, 37.9 rounded. So z interval does exactly what this calculation does, just with less rounding error. Let's go ahead and try another example where we had some raw data. And And that was down here when we were estimating a mean and we didn't have a population standard deviation. So this was the first example for our T distribution confidence intervals. So we were studying the number of hours of sleep for people who were undergoing hypnotherapy. In this case, I have a list of raw data. So the very first thing I'm going to do is go stat, enter, and put that data in a list. And I think I just deleted the data that was already in there, which was kind of silly of me. Now I'm ready to make the function call for my confidence interval. So I'm going to go stat tests. I'm estimating a mean. I don't have sigma, so that's a T interval. And I want to tell it I have a list of raw data. It asks where the list is. Leave frequency set to 1 unless your data was grouped. And it's going to calculate X bar and S on its own. It's also going to calculate the sample size and degrees of freedom on its own. All it needs is our confidence level, 0.95. And again, you'll notice it spits out exactly what we got when we did it manually, 18.16, 9.80. It just goes out a few decimal places further. There's less rounding error here. All right, let's go ahead and do one more example so you can see what it looks like for a proportion function call. So for our first proportion confidence interval, we had a random sample of 250 people, and we were conducting a survey of whether or not they owned a tablet. We should never have a list of raw data for a proportion interval, so that makes life easier. And I only have one function call for proportion confidence intervals, one prop z int. And notice it asks for x and n. We were told sample successes was 98, sample size was 250, confidence level was 95. And if we scroll down, you'll notice again, it's spitting out those same values that we got when we conducted this manually. This right here, 0.4525 would round up to 453, which is exactly what we got when we did it by hand. I would recommend, as you work through the homework this week and practice for the test, pick one method or the other. The by hand method that we did in the first video, so this method here, or the calculator method. If you do the calculator method, you would need to write down what we put in that test menu. So if I go back, say to our z interval example, I would need to write, I did z interval stats, sigma was 6, x bar was 0, n was 250, c level was 0.95, and then the calculator output. Giving me an answer without showing me what you put in the calculator is failing to show supporting work, and we know that results in reduced credit. So make sure that you're either doing it manually or you're showing me that calculator input. All right, so that is it for week 4. If you have questions on anything you've seen or read, or need help with the homework, feel free to drop by office hours or send me an email. Otherwise, I'll see you next week.